Timothy Theodore Duncan, aka the Big Fundamental, is a former American professional basketball player. Any fan of the sport knows how he's the greatest power forward of all time and one of the greatest players in NBA history. Duncan spent his entire 19-year playing career in the sport with the San Antonio Spurs. Stay tuned while we tell you all about the basketball veteran's memorable career. First things first, a quick recap of Duncan's biggest achievements. Duncan dominated opponents as soon as he made his way into the NBA thanks to his flawless fundamentals and humble approach to the game he was playing. The man was a 5-time NBA champion, 2-time MVP, and 3-time Finals MVP, but never a show-off. He's ranked by a lot of experts in the top 10, and in some cases, top 5 greatest players of all time lists. Today, we want to talk about a few players out of the 464 opponents who never managed to defeat him in a single game on his incredible resume. That's right, Tim Duncan has had a perfect record against 464 different players in his career, but right now, we don't have nearly enough time to get through a list that long. To begin, let's take a look at the 2 players against whom Duncan had the most wins with no losses, Dan Dickau and John Starks. Duncan faced point guard Dan Dickau 16 times during his prime years from 2003 to 2007. Dickau only started 3 of those games and averaged 15.6 minutes per game. Duncan, on the other hand, averaged 21.3 points per game, 11.2 rebounds per game, and 2.9 blocks per game in these victories. Dickau had previously played for the Hawks, Trailblazers, Mavericks, Hornets, Celtics, and Clippers. Up next, Duncan's memorable plays against Starks and McCarty. Tim Duncan faced John Starks 16 times between 1997 and 2022, while Starks was with the Knicks, Warriors, and Jazz. Starks started 10 of the 16 games against the Spurs, averaging 7.4 PPG, 2.6 RPG, and 2.2 APG. Duncan dominated these games, averaging 23.2 points per game, 11.3 rebounds per game, and 2.8 blocks per game. Duncan's best game against Starks came in January 2022 when he scored 35 points, grabbed 10 rebounds, and blocked 5 shots against the Utah Jazz. Tim Duncan's next best unbeaten record against NBA opponents came against Walter McCarty. Duncan and McCarty met 13 times in the regular season and once in the playoffs, while McCarty was with the Boston Celtics from 1997 to 2005. He only made 3 starts in these games and averaged 4.5 points per game. Duncan was at his best as a player during this period, averaging 21.6 PPG, 12.4 RPG, and 2.8 BPG. He had a memorable game against McCarty during his 1999 championship season. In the 103-94 victory, the 46-year-old had 30 points, 17 rebounds, and 5 blocks. Here are a few more of the 464 players that never stood a chance against Duncan. Bimbo Coles was another veteran point guard whose team struggled against Duncan. Coles had spent the majority of his career as a journeyman, having played for 7 different teams. Coles only made 6 starts and averaged 5.3 points per game in his 12 losses to Duncan. Duncan was at the pinnacle of his career, averaging 20.3 points per game, 10.6 rebounds per game, and 2.1 blocks per game. In 1999, Duncan played his best game against Coles' Warriors. He led the way with 25 points, 11 rebounds, and 5 blocks. During the 1990s and 2000s, Tim also had a perfect 11-0 record against 3 different NBA stars. Duncan won 11 games against Andre Blatch from 2007 to 2012, averaging 15.3 points per game and 7.5 rebounds. Rashad McCants, a former UNC standout, has also lost all 11 of his career games against Duncan. Tim once again had the better numbers with 17.5 PPG and 12.3 RPG. He also defeated Shelvin Mack all 11 times he faced him, averaging 15.4 PPG and 12.5 RPG. As you can see, Tim Duncan was still dominant enough to contribute to consistently winning basketball even later in his career. Moving on, Duncan's an amazing player even if you ignore his perfect record. A 464-0 record does not change Tim Duncan's ranking as a player, but it is an incredible accomplishment nonetheless. Duncan's Hall of Fame career is self-evident. He was named an All-Star in his rookie season, kicking off an 8-year streak of averaging at least 20 PPG and 11 RPG. In his second season, 1999, he led the Spurs to their first NBA championship and launched a dynasty in San Antonio. Duncan would be named Finals MVP for his efforts, and he was only getting started. Tim would lead the Spurs to 3 more championships in 2003, 2005, and 2007, totaling 4 in 10 seasons with him on the team. Duncan had become the greatest big man in the modern NBA, rivaling the likes of Shaquille O'Neal, Wilt Chamberlain, and Hakeem Olajuwon for his 15 All-Star appearances, 15 All-NBA team selections, and 15 All-Defensive team selections. Again, we think it's important to note that having an undefeated record against these players really isn't the end-all be-all for debate conversations. How Duncan played head-to-head against so many of these amazing players certainly does when you talk about his consistent consistency and greatness. And it also definitely makes for fun banter to talk about all the players that could never topple the mountain that was Tim Duncan. Now let's talk about how Tim Duncan holds interesting records against other all-time great big men. While we're on the topic, let's also have a quick look at all the other interesting records Tim Duncan has against NBA legends, particularly names he's often compared to. Duncan had a perfect 10-0 record against Rockets legend Hakeem Olajuwon, as you may have noticed. It's worth noting that Olajuwon was nearing the end of his career at the time, and half of those games came while he was a bench warmer for the Raptors. However, there are some other noteworthy records against players he faced during their primes that we'd like to discuss. The first is Kevin Garnett, who many believe would have had Duncan's career if he had been drafted by the Spurs instead. Duncan has a 33-19 record against Garnett in 52 games from 1997 to 2015. Duncan also has a 53-37 record against Dirk Nowitzki, averaging 20.2 PPG and 11.9 RPG. Duncan has a 29-33 record against Shaquille O'Neal, with Shaq outperforming him with 22 PPG and 12.1 RPG. A closer look at the Big Fundamentals resume today reveals why many consider him to be a top 10 or top 5 player of all time. Up next, Duncan wasn't just a phenomenal player. During Duncan's tenure, the Spurs were one of the NBA's few elite franchises. Duncan worked hard and provided leadership in addition to his talent, establishing an ethos that permeated throughout the organization. Behind that stern expression was a fierce competitor, eager to win and eager for his teammates to contribute regardless of their position. ESPN analyst and former teammate Bruce Bowen said that it's at practice where you really get a chance to see what someone is about, and that no one can say they saw Tim take nights off as far as the work was concerned. Bowen also talked about how he would see Duncan in his own little world putting in the work, explaining that when you see the top dog putting in the work, it sends a message immediately. Greg Popovich said Duncan led by example, and even to this day, up until COVID, he's in the gym every day. That's just how the Big Fundamental rolls. Popovich talked about how, with his teammates, Duncan set the quiet example of competing every day, whether it was practice, shoot-around, or of course the games. He always took the lead. When the Spurs signed new players, he was the guy who welcomed them all and made everyone feel comfortable, letting them know what he expected of them. His standards were really high, but he made sure he gave everybody an opportunity to commit to a role and fulfill it. Lastly, the basketball legend had humble beginnings in the sport, and when he left, a humble exit. Tim Duncan left the NBA the same way he entered it, as a starter for the San Antonio Spurs with a selfless commitment to winning, but no particular interest in the spotlight. He evolved so much as a player and as a person over the duration of his remarkable career that lasted almost 2 whole decades. But Duncan's core values never wavered as he developed into one of the best power forwards in basketball history. Duncan was a force offensively and defensively. He told Spurs.com in the only interview he gave before his mandatory Hall of Fame press conference that it was all a combination of competitiveness on his own part, along with his love for playing the game. Duncan never seemed like he cared about chasing the spotlight, and even though the light will shine on Duncan during the Hall induction, he'll most probably share the honors with everyone else in one of the greatest Hall of Fame classes. We all know how humble he is. That's a wrap for this video. Is Tim Duncan the greatest power forward of all time? We think anyone who knows anything about basketball would agree. What do you guys think? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you at the next one.